Okay, so asking a little help from any YouTube viewers who are interested in this, working on a project in regards to animation. And I'm not talking like the history of animation, the history of different movies, the stories behind them, whatever. I'm not really interested in the history aspect. What I'm interested in is fan perspective and influence, and basically when we watch animated movies, what do we think of? What goes through our minds? How has some animated movies, how have they influenced us, and how has our viewership or whatever, but how has that influenced animation? How have studios changed in order to come up with something new, come up with something different? How are they challenging themselves based on what they've seen, with numbers and everything, box office records and whatever? How has all that, changed and grown? And I want to talk about basically what I consider to be the three biggies. One would definitely be Disney. I mean, it's like Walt Disney, and just Disney in general, is one of those names that probably 95% of the world knows. Not just like the country or anything, but the world knows the name Disney. Also, Don Bluth, who is, again, one of the other animation gods, if you will, of definitely in like the 80s and 90s. 90s was hit or miss with this guy, but I'm getting into that later. And the other is DreamWorks, because they did kind of split off from Disney, but they've also really taken some stuff that I never would have thought that any animated movie, especially geared towards kids or, families and everything, they've done some challenging stuff. And that's one of the things I want to talk about with this whole project. I mean, this is all going to be something that's eventually all going to be written down. I would love to write this out, and I'd love to, actually get this published, made into a book, have this be like our fan profile, if you will, just, put out there so it's something that when you read it, you're not just reading about like I said, not just reading about the history of animation, but how we feel about it. This is what it's about. This is about feelings and emotions and opinions. This is not going to be objective. This is not going to be, you're looking at this as a bystander. You're looking at, you're not looking at this professionally. You're not looking at it professionally. You're looking at it as emotionally, either as through your memories as a kid, through nostalgia, or as an adult looking back on it, which I guess is the same thing as nostalgia, but you get my drift. So there's that. And now a few questions. Questions that, again, YouTube viewers, I would please give me your answers, because this is going to help me work on this. One is, first thing, when you think of, when someone says an animated movie, what animated movie do you have the best memory of? Not necessarily talking, what's your favorite. This is just, when you think, animated movies, what's the first animated movie you think of? I would also like to hear your favorites. Also, have you ever, what animated movie have you ever cried at? Or what animated movie has scared you? Again, just, this is all going to be like opinion. This is all going to be, very, very subjective. So, your favorites. What animated movie do you hate? What animated movie do you wish they would remake? Again, answer these questions. Please tell me. It's going to help. But let's move into the actual sort of categories or chapters or parts or whatever that I really want to get into with this project and everything. First of all, I want to talk about the risks. And these are the risky movies that producers and everything, these studios put out, and that paid off, even though this is stuff that was either challenging or, like I said, took a lot of risks. Went places that you really wouldn't think of. A kids movie would go, because there are a few. Hunchback of Notre Dame is the first one that comes into my mind. A very dark story with, lots of, heavy religious overtones and all this, hellfire and everything. Yeah, the hellfire song sequence. Look that up on YouTube and tell me if you really think that would have been appropriate for a little kid. Anyway, Watership Down. Again, my favorite movie of all time. I've said that. Did a commentary, which I put up, and they took down from YouTube. I don't know why. Well, copyright, but anyway, moving on. But again, with DreamWorks, The Prince of Egypt. That was another one that was like, religious movies, I think, are very, very tricky, and not just for kids, but in general, because you've got to be so careful about what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're representing the story. Because religious people, I'm not necessarily one of them, but some religious people can get really particular. They can get very persnickety about how stuff is represented. And just putting this out quick, I love the movie simply because of the fact that they put it more on a more human level. There is the supernatural stuff in there, God and whatnot, but they bring it down to much more of the human, the family issues, the emotional stuff, and that is wonderful. And I really like that, because that makes it a little easier for me to deal with the whole religious thing. Secret of NIMH, Don Bluth's very first work, and this is one of those cases where it's like, I mean, this was the first thing he did with his new studio, and it could have just completely, totally bombed. I mean, as it was, it didn't. I think they said it wasn't a critical success, but it was kind of a financial success, but I guess not enough to, it was like, we're going to, go right out of the gate, but technically speaking, it didn't, there were, I forget what it was. You can probably look online, but it was like, yeah, it's like a lot of people liked it and everything, but it wasn't the, groundbreaking success that we're hoping for, but it's still an incredible movie. And I'll get into the Don Bluth. Okay, I'm going to do another video, which is going to do the Don Bluth formulas versus Disney formulas. But getting back to the list here. But yeah, All Dogs Go to Heaven, another of Don Bluth's big risky moves, especially because of how adult it got and how it's trying to be family oriented, but at the same time it's doing this stuff that's, really not kid friendly. That's really more of, for, like older kids, maybe 10 years and up. So yeah, that was another risk that really paid off. I mean, a lot of people, especially VHS sales, the home video release, that was when it really hit. Something else I want to talk to in regards to sequels. And oh boy, is there going to be stuff to talk about when it comes to Don Bluth. The only sequel that I would say is really better than the original is An American Tail, Fievel Goes West. And I'll talk about that later, but talking about that, because talking about that gets into the whole Don Bluth formula versus the Disney movie formula. So that's something I will get into a later date. Music, both orchestral scores and actual soundtracks. So it's like stuff that's got lyrics in it. Because there's some music, there's some scores that are just incredible to listen to. And there's soundtracks, there's, songs that, stick with us, even like, 30 years later, Somewhere Out There from An American Tail. That's one of, I still get goosebumps listening to that. And of course, like a lot of Disney songs and everything, even like the old classic Disney songs, and then like the newer ones, Lion King, one of like the greatest soundtracks and everything. So I'll talk about that, like the influence of that, and also some of the songs that work, some of the songs that didn't work, some of the songs that were hit or miss. Also want to talk about movies with a message, and it's like, like just we're kind of not quite pushing the issue, but strength of character, recognition of a kindred spirit, even though you two just the fact that you recognize that someone might be a kindred spirit, even though you're a complete opposite, there's still something about this other person, this other, character that you recognize in yourself, or that you, or characteristics that you can admire, even if, you're an enemy. Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron is something like that. Princess and the Frog, which is, I really like simply because it has the first workaholic Disney princess. By the way, that's another thing I forgot to put on here, but the whole Disney princess thing, trust me, that's really interesting, because if you look at it, there's probably about 5 or 6 of the canon Disney princesses that aren't. If you look at the lineup, and you can like look on YouTube, Disney princesses, they've got like the lineup and everything. There's probably about 4 or 5, maybe 6, that are not princesses. They don't even marry royalty. Mulan is one. Esmeralda from Hunchback of Notre Dame. Neither of those are princesses. They don't marry a prince. And then also, like, there's some princesses that are only princesses by marriage. And I think there's only actually 2, Ariel and Aurora. Yeah, Ariel from Little Mermaid and Aurora from Sleeping Beauty. I think, as far as animation and everything, those are the only 2 that were born to royalty and marry royalty. Which kind of is interesting if you think about it. But also getting back to the movies with message. Land Before Time, again, going back to Don Bluth and everything. And also kind of crossovers. And what I mean by a crossover is not necessarily like you have characters going from one movie to another. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, perfect example. You have A Bug's Life from Disney when they were working with Pixar, and Ants, which was the first movie released by DreamWorks. So it's like stuff like this, where it's like similar storylines, similar formulas, stuff like that. It's like, how do you see like this same formula in this movie, even though they're entirely different studios? Also, as I like to call it, the fuck-ups. And I'm not talking about mistakes, technically speaking. I'm talking about things that, okay, historical inaccuracies. And Disney is guilty as charged like this, of this. But yeah, Pocahontas, A Little Mermaid, the Hans Christian Andersen story is way different than the Disney version. Aladdin, which, if you've ever seen the Nostalgia Critics Disney-cember, and he's talking about Aladdin, it's sort of like, Las Vegas MGM version of, Arabia, not necessarily historically accurate, but then again, I have to say, that region is not necessarily female-friendly, and no offense to anyone who's watching this who's from that area, but But yeah, but just, stuff that, maybe shouldn't have been done or should have really, really been looked at a lot harder. Don Bluth is guilty of many things of this. One, his sequels. He really should have just said, you know what, if you're doing any sequels to my movies, I don't care if MGM has the rights, at least give them some dignity and respect. But again, that goes into the sequels part of this. And also what I'm going to call the finales. And this isn't, these are like the last great movies, at least, again, from my perspective, because this is, this is going to be my opinion, but then other people, I'll include other people's opinions as well. Because I want to get all ranges of, a lot of the stuff. But yeah, as far as the finales, the last traditionally animated movie, The Princess and the Frog. What I've considered, at least just, from previews, I haven't seen, a lot of DreamWorks stuff in the past, couple of years, so this might not necessarily be fair. But Kung Fu Panda 2 was an incredible thing from DreamWorks. So, I mean, that was kind of the last thing I saw of them that really captured my interest, that really caught my eye. Anastasia, which was, in my opinion, one of the last great movies that Don Bluth did. Boy, I can imagine that's going to bring up some controversy, and not just because of mostly because, probably because of the historical inaccuracies, but also because a lot of people weren't really keen on it. But here's the thing, and again, I'll talk about this more when I talk about the formulas. Anastasia was one of the few movies Don Bluth did that I think he really did a good job at blending his formula and the Disney formula. I mean, those two really do, they conflict. They don't work well together, typically. But if done the right way, they can be great. Actually, All Dogs Go to Heaven, except for the big-lipped alligator moment, worked pretty well, except I think that was leaning a little bit more towards Don Bluth, which made it a little bit more serious and a little less kid-friendly, but again, get into that later. So there's that. And then the next generation, as I call it. Disney's leaving of traditional animation and going more into the CG. They're working with Pixar. And DreamWorks, too. DreamWorks, did this thing, like I said, some of their stuff was traditionally animated. Some of it was more towards CGI. And, how that evolved. And also animation styles. Just a similar way things are drawn. Again, DreamWorks did do this, for a while at first. I mean, some of their stuff, if you just looked at some DreamWorks movies and you looked at a Disney movie back to back, you can see the similarities, but they're two different studios. But you can still see that they look the same, or similar, I should say. And also the risks that didn't pay off. And this was, was a Titan AE. I will actually have to do a little research on that. But it's just stuff that they tried doing that didn't work or didn't mesh or didn't do something. It's like, we're going to try something different. We're going to try a new way to hook the audience. And for whatever reason, that didn't pay off. Also, voice actors. I mean, some of the iconic roles, some of these iconic actors. Matthew Broderick doing the voice of adult Simba in The Lion King. James Earl Jones, again, Mufasa, Lion King. But also John Hurt, who did the voice of Hazel in Watership Down. Jodie Benson, voice of Ariel in The Little Mermaid. There's a lot of things to talk about that, and I'll cover that. Some of the voice actors, some of my favorites, and also kids movies and dealing with the idea of death, because especially like some of the early Disney movies and even some of the later ones, there are some very interesting things that they do to, and I can't quite say soften the blow, but just the way they deal with the concept of death and making it more towards kids, but you're not really, well, it's like when you're watching a movie and a character dies, it's like, how do you deal with that? How do you change that? How do you get that emotion? But how do you make it so that, as a kid, you can understand it, you can deal with it. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I'm going to be working on with this project and everything, just, over time. But anything that you want to chime in with, thoughts about anything that I've talked about, please let me know. The more opinions, the better. And like I said, this isn't something that I want just to be based on my opinion. I want it to be based on a lot of other people's opinions, and I've actually looked this up, but a lot of the books that are out there, they are very, history oriented. They're, the details, they're more focused on the facts, and not so much as focused on the emotion behind it, behind what does this mean to the people watching it, or the kids watching it, or, So yeah, please chime in, let me know what you think, and next video I'm going to do is talking about the Don Bluth formula versus the Disney formula, how they've meshed, and it's really interesting to note, because when you figure out the formulas, it's really easy to see you really start noticing it. Once I'll bring up, I'll talk about the Disney formula and just kind of some of the details of that, and the Bluth formula and some of the details of that. And you'll start, if you look at some of his other movies and everything, you'll start noticing where where he's leaning to one side or the other. So, later.